Welcome back to another UCL Fantasy video. This will be the best team for Matchday 7 as things stand, and this is also my updated draft. I'll be uploading a team selection video over the weekend and also a deadline stream next Tuesday. That's the plan. I will be on holiday, but I'll try to get some UCL Fantasy and FPL content out regardless. And there's also going to be a Friday deadline stream for FPL ahead of Game Week 24 and the team selection video tomorrow. So be sure to check all of that out and smash the like button. If this video gets over 200 likes, then all of those videos and live streams will be up on the channel and everything will be covered. All the doubles and blanks coming up in FPL and all the updates following the FA Cup results and everything you need to know. So everything will be covered here. And also check out the links in the description below for my Twitter and Instagram. Follow me on those platforms. Join the Discord server, the FPL League, the UCL Fantasy League as well. And not only that, there's a link to Draft Hound in all of my videos. But without further ado, let's jump straight into this video. It's that time of year and Man City are on a run, 9 wins in a row across all competitions, and it all started when they went off to the Club World Cup, won that tournament with ease. They've kept 5 clean sheets in the last 9 matches and have also conceded only 5 goals. I think Ederson is a very good way of covering that Man City defence. Everyone is available and there could be a lot of rotation in the defensive line, but with Ederson you would expect him to start every single Champions League game, despite the fact that Ortega has started 2 in the group stages and Ederson started the other 4, and in that time Ederson kept 1 clean sheet, only made 4 saves, conceded 3 goals and 13 UCL fantasy points, so it's nothing spectacular. He's also priced at 6 million, which is very steep for a goalkeeper, and he's owned by 20% of the game. But I think with Man City's form and also the fixture, if you look at all the ties, Man City to go through is probably the most likely scenario of any team. Real Madrid are facing Leipzig, that's slightly tougher, but Man City against Copenhagen, it'd be very shocking if they were to go out. Now, my other goalkeeper featured in the first draft and he remains in this team, and despite having a tough game in the round of 16, his team are defending extremely well and he was a very good asset in the group stages. And I'm talking about Jan Sommer, the highest owned goalkeeper in UCL Fantasy with 29% ownership, but he's priced at 4.5 million. He's an absolute bargain at that price. And it might shock some of you to hear, but Inter Milan have kept 4 clean sheets in a row against Lazio and Napoli in the Supercoppa Italiana, as I mentioned in the first draft video, but they also followed that up with 1-0 wins over Fiorentina and Juventus, which was a top of the table clash, and they are now top of Serie A with a game in hand over Juventus and they're 4 points clear, and they've conceded 10 league goals in 22 matches in Serie A. And in terms of the clean sheets and stuff like that in UCL Fantasy, Sommer has kept 3 out of 5 matches in a quite tough group with Benfica and Real Sociedad. Inter Milan did finish second after all, which was quite surprising, but Inter Milan defensively are still one of the best teams in Europe, and 26 UCL fantasy points for Sommer is quite impressive. That's double of Ederson, for example. 2 goals conceded and 19 saves there for Sommer. So the only downside to him is the fact that he's facing Atletico Madrid, who are quite an attacking team nowadays under Diego Simeone. So maybe a clean sheet will be quite unlikely, but Inter Milan, I'd actually put them as slight favourites to advance compared to Atletico Madrid. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below, but let's now move on to the defenders. Mats Hummels also stays in this team, but it's worth mentioning that since his return from injury, he hasn't started a single game, which is very concerning. But Borussia Dortmund do play on the 20th of February, so it gives Borussia Dortmund plenty of time to ease Hummels back in. If he doesn't start over the weekend, it's slightly concerning, and the deadline is, of course, a couple of days after that. But Dortmund will play in the following week, so that could be a big advantage for those looking to go for the highest scoring defender in the UCL Fantasy group stages. So he was unavailable recently due to a virus, I believe it was, but he came on as a sub in Borussia Dortmund's 3-1 win versus Bochum in late January, and he was benched versus Heidenheim in a 0-0 draw. That was Borussia Dortmund's last game at the time of this recording. Dortmund are 4th in the Bundesliga table with 26 goals conceded after 20 games. Not a great record, but Hummels was integral to Borussia Dortmund topping the group of death in the Champions League group stages. He kept 3 clean sheets out of 6 matches, the most points of any defender, as I mentioned, and also the most ball recoveries of any player in the game with 57. And that's what I like most about Mats Hummels. He is playing against PSV away, and whilst PSV have drawn a couple of games recently, they still have 18 wins, 2 draws and 0 losses in the Eredivisie, and it's only in the Champions League where they have dropped some points. They lost to Arsenal 4-0 away from home, but also drew to them 1-1 in the reverse fixture. And PSV are a good team, but Borussia Dortmund are still the favourites to advance, and I think Mats Hummels is one of the best defenders in UCL Fantasy, especially if Borussia Dortmund can continue their Champions League form into the knockout stages. Now, the second defender is where the changes start to happen. I went for Ruben Dias originally, but I'm going to go for a like-for-like replacement in Gvardiol, who has started a lot of games recently for Man City. Maybe not as many as Ruben Dias, but that's 6 starts in a row for the Croatian. He's playing as a centre-back or as a left-back, and he's done quite well. And whilst he had a bit of a shaky start at Man City, he has gradually improved. He's a young defender, still a lot to learn, and I think he's very good in UCL Fantasy. Probably the best Man City defender in this fantasy format because of the ball recoveries and everything he has to offer. Man City have won the last 5 games in a row in the Premier League specifically, and everyone, like I said earlier, is available for the citizens. Gvardiol started 6 games in a row, 1 yellow card in his last 10 games, but no goal contributions. That's the big downside with Gvardiol, but I think the lack of yellow cards is a very big plus. You have a lot of defenders here and there who might be good UCL fantasy assets. They get a lot of ball recoveries and clean sheets, but they also pick up yellow cards and could even be prone to the occasional red. With Gvardiol, you won't get that, and he's also a mega differential with 6% ownership. Just like any Man City defender, his price isn't favourable. It is 5.5 million, but I think he is worth it if he can start every single game until Man City are knocked out, or if they go on to reach the final and potentially win the competition yet again. But Gvardiol has kept 1 clean sheet out of 3 matches in the Champions League, 17 UCL fantasy points, so he's averaging almost 6 points per game, 21 ball recoveries, 1 assist in the Champions League, 3 goals conceded, and once again, 0 yellow cards. That's something I really like about Gvardiol, and that's why he could come into my final team over Ruben Dias or any other Man City defender. Man City are the favourites to win the Champions League, and as I mentioned earlier, their chances of reaching the quarterfinals are pretty much 90% or over, if we're being honest. They are heavy favourites to advance, so I think Gvardiol is worth it, and going for a double up in the Man City defence could prove fruitful, not just for the round of 16, but also in the long run, going into the quarterfinals, potentially semi-finals, and beyond. Let's now move on to the third defender, and he also featured in the original video, the first one I made for Matchday 7, and his country have now been knocked out of the Asian Cup, so he will be back over the weekend and potentially be available for next week's match against Lazio, and that is Kim Min-jae. He's my favourite Bayern Munich defender simply because of ball recoveries. I think that's his best asset. Bayern Munich aren't the greatest defensively, but in terms of underlying numbers in the Bundesliga, throughout the top 5 leagues, Bayern Munich have the best expected goals conceded that is non-penalty, which is quite surprising to me, and Bayern Munich have been keeping quite a few clean sheets since Manuel Neuer has returned from injury. He featured in the first draft video, and he might still yet come in to my final team, but Kim Min-jae for me is the best Bayern Munich defensive coverage period, even over Davis and Manuel Neuer himself. And South Korea were eliminated, like I said, from the Asian Cup. They lost to Jordan, but Kim Min-jae should be available now. Let me know if you disagree with that, and if you think that Kim Min-jae could be eased back into things and sit on the bench in Matchday 7. And in terms of the Champions League, Kim Min-jae has kept only 1 clean sheet out of 5 matches, 26 UCL fantasy points, but he's got the 3rd most ball recoveries of any player with 46, and also 6 goals conceded for Kim Min-jae whilst he was on the pitch. But I think he's a good UCL fantasy asset, and I would highly recommend him in the knockout stages. Now, the fourth defender, I'm not entirely sure of, to be quite honest with you, but Real Sociedad are looking really strong defensively. PSG will be the favourites to advance, but I think Real Sociedad could shock them and go through to the quarterfinal. So I am going for Zubeldia. Some of you might be going for Munoz, who isn't flagged in UCL Fantasy, but he is out for the entire season due to an ACL injury. That will be updated probably around the Monday. A lot of injuries aren't updated right away like you would get in FPL, for example, and that's maybe one downside to UCL Fantasy, but it also rewards engaged managers who have been following the news and maybe watching more football. But Zubeldia, I think, is a very good way of covering that Real Sociedad defence. You could argue Ramiro is even better, but I'd rather go for Jan Sommer there, and Zubeldia is a cheap defender. I'm not really a big fan of the alternatives at this price and below. He is priced at 4.8 million. He's also a massive differential with 1% ownership. But Real Sociedad, just like Inter Milan, have kept 4 clean sheets out of the last 5 matches and only 1 goal conceded in that period. Zubeldia has 21 starts out of 22 La Liga appearances, and Real Sociedad are 6th in the table. Not that great, but they've only lost 4 matches. They've won 9 and drawn 11, so they're a very competitive side and very solid defensively. Only 21 goals conceded after 23 games in La Liga. So Munoz would have been my favourite Real Sociedad defender, but he's out for the season, it looks like. So Zubeldia is the next best in the defensive line. You've also got Traore and other options here and there. Tierney, unfortunately, is injured yet again. He keeps on picking up these injuries throughout his time at Celtic, Arsenal, and now Real Sociedad on loan. But Zubeldia kept 4 clean sheets out of 6 matches. The same goes for Real Sociedad, of course, and 36 UCL fantasy points. One of the highest scoring defenders in the group stages. 37 ball recoveries, 2 goals conceded, 2 yellow cards. I think that's one downside to Zubeldia. He does pick up quite a few yellow cards, but only 1 blank for Zubeldia in the group stages. His consistency is very impressive, and whilst away from home against PSG, you'd probably expect a blank, it wouldn't surprise me if Real Sociedad kept the clean sheet in the reverse fixture in Matchday 8 and went through to the quarterfinals. Having said all that, Zubeldia is probably the least nailed on in this defensive line and also throughout my entire squad, but I just think he's a nice differential, and if you're looking for a cheap defender, Zubeldia could be one of the best options at your disposal. Now, the final defender I'm going for is Saliba, who hasn't been in great form recently. He looked very shaky against Liverpool despite Arsenal winning 3-1, and Arsenal have kept 2 clean sheets out of the last 8 matches. Against Liverpool, they conceded virtually no chances, but they scored an own goal. They pretty much caused their own downfall towards the end of the first half, and that has been a story throughout Arsenal's season. They have one of the best underlying numbers defensively throughout all of Europe. In the Premier League, they've got the best defensive numbers. They've also now got the least goals conceded alongside Liverpool, but Arsenal always seem to find a way to concede a goal and not keep the clean sheets that they deserve. Arsenal have now won 3 games in a row, though, after that very difficult run they experienced recently, with 1 victory across 7 games across all competitions, and they're 3rd in the Premier League table, only 2 points behind Liverpool, who are the league leaders. And Saliba has 3 yellow cards in the last 5 games, and maybe if you cast your mind back to a couple of months ago in FPL and UCL Fantasy, when I first bought Saliba in both fantasy formats, Saliba had a really good run of no yellow cards in over a year, I think it was, and then he started getting quite a lot recently, so that is a big shame. Saliba is a quality defender, and typically he's very composed and doesn't pick up too many bookings, but it has been the case recently, and it's certainly worth mentioning. His ownership is 16%, so he's still not a template pick, not a differential, he's kind of in between. Priced at 5.5 million with Gabriel, for example, he gets fewer ball recovery points, and he also is priced higher, so I'd rather go for Saliba in UCL Fantasy. And Arsenal kept 3 clean sheets out of 6 matches in the group stages, 31 UCL Fantasy points for Saliba, 30 ball recoveries, and only 4 goals conceded. So pretty good numbers, not the best, but I think Saliba could be one of the best defenders in the UCL Fantasy knockout stages. I've made one key change in the heart of the midfield, and that's Calhanoglu in for Rodri, and Calhanoglu is priced at 7.1 million, owned by 7% of the game, so he's a nice differential, and he's the main penalty taker for Inter Milan, and he also has 4 yellow cards in the last 7 games, 3 goals and 1 assist in that time. So the yellow cards is a bit concerning. The same goes for the fixture. I'm not a huge fan of having 2 or 3 players from this Inter Milan versus Atletico Madrid matchup. If I get it wrong, then I will be down a couple of players heading into the quarterfinals. So it's something I might address, and I might have to get rid of at least one of Calhanoglu or Jan Sommer, but for the time being, both of them are in this team. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below. With Joshua Kimmich now close to a return, he could be available as soon as this weekend. If that's the case, I could make that switch of Calhanoglu to Joshua Kimmich, so it all depends on the fitness of the German international. Now, in terms of UCL fantasy points for Calhanoglu, he has 26 for the season, 1 goal, 1 yellow card, 1 player of the match award, 28 ball recoveries, and 3 clean sheets out of 4 matches. That's all very impressive, but the rest of the midfield is where most of the points will come from, especially from this next individual who scored a hat-trick in his last Premier League game, and that is Phil Foden, who has been in most of my drafts for UCL Fantasy, and I've had him for a while in FPL as well. Usually Foden does very well for me in UCL Fantasy, but whenever I buy him in FPL, he's quite useless. But now, he's just in great form, probably the best season he's had up until this point. He's now got 8 goals and 7 assists in the Premier League season, and he's just looking on fire. He's actually only blanked once since Game Week 17 in FPL, and we're heading into Game Week 24 in the next weekend. So it just goes to show how consistent he has been. And I think with Foden, the most impressive thing about him is that he's the most nailed he has ever been. There is a slight chance of that changing with Haaland and De Bruyne now able to start games consistently. And my main concern with Foden is when he plays on the right-hand side. He is least effective in that position. But against Brentford, he played on the left and also in central areas just behind the striker. Foden plays his best football and also is capable of the most goals and assists to give you those UCL fantasy and of course FPL points if you also play that fantasy format. And with Foden, he's owned by 11% of the game and his price is 8.1 million, so he's still quite accessible and he's one of the best midfielders in the game right now. In terms of UCL fantasy points, 38. He's the 5th highest scoring midfielder, 2 double-digit hauls, 3 goals, 2 assists, 10 ball recoveries, 2 player of the match awards, and 1 clean sheet. So there's a lot to like with Foden. I genuinely believe he's the best Man City midfielder, despite the fact that Kevin De Bruyne has returned and he's also not blanked since the last couple of game weeks where he started games consistently for Man City. Even off the bench against Newcastle, he got his biggest haul yet. But next up is, for me, the best UCL fantasy asset, and that is Bellingham, who's owned by 75% of the game. That's probably going to increase to 80% and beyond by the time we get to the deadline. Now, Bellingham has been booked in 3 out of his last 5 games. He's picking up far too many yellow cards recently. At one stage, it was 7 yellow cards out of the last 9 games. He's got 14 goals in 20 La Liga appearances with 3 assists. He's blanked in the last couple, and Real Madrid are now 2 points ahead of Girona, and they did draw 1-1 against Atletico Madrid, which I'll discuss very soon. And he also took Real Madrid's last penalty and converted from the spot in a 3-2 win over Almeria. So if Bellingham is also on penalties, that just makes him even more appealing as a UCL fantasy option. He's priced at 7.9 million. That is an absolute bargain. He was criminally underpriced in the first place. And in UCL fantasy, he has been almost impeccable this season. He has returned in all 5 of his UCL fantasy starts, 3 double-digit returns. In terms of UCL fantasy points, he is second, only behind Galeno with 50 points overall, 4 goals, 3 assists, 14 ball recoveries, 3 player of the match awards, and 2 yellow cards. A bit similar to a few players I've talked about today. I think the key downgrade or downside to Bellingham is the fact that he picks up far too many yellow cards, especially in recent matches. Now, next up is probably one of the most off-form players in this list, but he's so cheap and he was also very impressive in the group stages despite playing in the group of death, and that's going to be Zaire Emery. And he's got 2 goals and 1 yellow card in his last 10 games for club and country. Not great at all, and he's been benched in 2 of the last 3 matches and is in poor form overall. He's got 2 goals and 2 assists in 17 Ligue 1 starts. He recently picked up an injury, which he picked up in December, and he's returned in January. He's now slowly getting back into things. PSG are 8 points clear of Ligue 1, but Zaire Emery has been all over the place. He's been playing off form, been on the bench, played as a right back and right wing back in recent matches throughout January, and PSG are unbeaten in 15 matches since their 2-1 loss against AC Milan back in early November. But I'm a bit concerned about Zaire Emery, and I might need to make a change in this position. He's owned by 3% of the game, and his price is 5.3 million. And in terms of UCL fantasy points, he has 35, which includes 2 double-digit hauls, 1 goal, 3 assists, and he's got a bit of everything, including 2 player of the match awards. There's a lot to like with Zaire Emery, but his recent form is a major cause for concern. Now, my final midfielder is someone who was off form the last time I talked about him in UCL Fantasy, but he's now building a very good run, and that is Bukayo Saka, who's now got 3 goals and 1 assist in the last 4 appearances in the Premier League, and he's got 8 goals and 8 assists in FPL with 58 key passes. I always say this about Saka, even when he's not scoring or assisting, he's constantly creating chances, and his underlying numbers are as good as they've ever been. Even last season, when his overall performances have been better, the underlying numbers have been nowhere near as good as they currently are right now. On top of that, Saka has been exceptional in the Champions League this season with 43 UCL fantasy points, 3 double-digit returns in all 3 games at the Emirates this season in this competition, 3 goals, 4 assists, 1 player of the match award. The other stats aren't particularly great, like the ball recoveries, but that's not important with the likes of Saka. What you're going to get from him is consistent goal output, and what I want to see in the knockout stages is more returns away from home, because he only got 1 assist against Lens away, then he picked up an injury a few minutes later. But against Sevilla and PSV, to be fair, against PSV he didn't even start the game, and against Sevilla the other players stepped up like Gabriel Jesus, but that's just something you maybe would kind of find some criticism with him. And overall, he's right up there with Bellingham and Harry Kane in terms of the most goals and assists in this season's Champions League so far, and he's also got the most dribbles, if I'm not mistaken, in this competition. So Saka has been exceptional, and he's my favourite midfielder in terms of premium assets. You might not even class him as that because his price is 9.8 million, but only Kevin De Bruyne is actually more expensive than him. But I think Saka is better than Sane, and these options at this moment in time who used to be really good options in UCL Fantasy, but I think this season they have tailed off a little bit. Let me know your thoughts down in the comment section below for every single position and if you think there are ways to improve this team. But let's now complete the squad with the 3 forwards. Harry Kane might not be the most flashiest of players or someone who you enjoy watching, but he gets the job done, gets goals and assists consistently, and he's an all-round complete forward. 6 goals and 1 assist in the last 8 games across all competitions, including a goal in the recent 3-1 win over Borussia Mönchengladbach. 24 goals and 5 assists in just 20 Bundesliga starts. These are insane numbers, of course, and he's priced at 10.1 million. That is still an absolute bargain. He also has 41% ownership, 41 UCL Fantasy points, only 1 double-digit haul, but he also has a couple of 9-pointers in there too. 4 goals, 3 assists, just a bit like Saka, 3 goals and 4 assists in that case. 1 Player of the Match award for Kane, and also 5 ball recoveries, like I mentioned earlier. Bellingham, Saka and Kane have the joint most goals and assists in this season's Champions League, and Kane is currently leading the European Golden Shoe race, and to be honest, it's going to be difficult for anyone to catch him. Maybe Erling Haaland if he has an exceptional end to the season. The most likely to maybe match Harry Kane and potentially usurp him is Kylian Mbappe in Ligue 1. But speaking of which, Mbappe doesn't make the cut yet again. He is a good UCL Fantasy option, but I was more impressed by him last season where he got a lot of 9-pointers, Player of the Match awards, and he was just getting goals and assists every single game. But he's got 3 returns and also 3 blanks out of 6 matches. It was the group of death, to be fair, but he's been limited to 6 points really, if not just 2. So I'm a bit disappointed, you could say, with Kylian Mbappe. You'd probably expect much more from him against Real Sociedad. I think he could do really well in these matches. But next up, I'm going to go for Erling Haaland, despite the fact that since his return from injury, he has been fairly rusty, but he did get an assist against Brentford and played 86 minutes after being out for almost 2 months. He also came off the bench against Burnley just before that and got around 20 minutes. 14 goals and 5 assists for Haaland in just 17 Premier League games, and he's also owned by 50% of the game. That's only going to increase with that fixture against Copenhagen, the fact that he's now back from injury, and much more. So Erling Haaland for me is just one of the maybe not essential players, but he's close to that bracket if we're being honest. I think the only reason why he's not essential is because you have so many forwards to choose from, such as Vinicius Jr., Harry Kane, Kylian Mbappe, and much more. Even Gabriel Jesus is a good asset in UCL Fantasy. But speaking of which, I mentioned one of those players just now, and he's going to be the final forward. That is Vinicius Jr. But it's worth mentioning, he picked up an injury in the warm-up to the Madrid derby, which ended 1-1. But Vinicius Jr. should be back fairly soon. I would be very confident that he's going to be available for Matchday 7. If there are any Madrid fans who are maybe more pessimistic or have more information on the matter, let me know, of course, down in the comment section below. But Vinicius Jr. has been in good form overall. 5 goals and 1 assist in his last 5 games across all competitions, and that of course included a hat-trick against Barcelona in the Supercopa de España final. And also Vinicius has 6 goals and 2 assists in 14 La Liga games. Not that great, but it is better compared to this stage last season. And Vinicius Jr. is only owned by 8% of the game, so he's a massive differential. And one key change from the first draft video is Rodrigo out for Vinicius Jr., who has 23 UCL Fantasy points, 2 goals, 2 assists, 1 Player of the Match award, and 0 blanks out of the 3 games he has played. So if Vinicius Jr. can stay fit, I think he's a very good option in the forward line. But of course, there are so many options to choose from in UCL Fantasy compared to FPL in this position. And that's always been the case, even with Ronaldo and Messi no longer in Europe. But let's now move on to the starting 11, talking about the bench order and some key tips for UCL Fantasy, as well as the captaincy for all 4 days. Remember, you can change the captaincy 3 times. Have one for the Tuesday, then change it to the Wednesday, and then you've got 2 more captaincy options in the following week. So let's discuss all of that right now and talk about how to really set up our teams in the best way possible for Matchday 7. My starting 11 would be Ederson, Zubeldia, Gvardiol, Kim Min-jae. Then we're going to the midfield 4 of Calhanoglu, Foden, Bellingham, and Zaire Emery. And the front 3 is Kane, Haaland, and Vinicius Jr. My bench would be Sommer, Hummels, Saliba, and Saka. And it's not like FPL or any other fantasy format. I know some of you already know this, but for those of you that are new or are unsure about how UCL Fantasy exactly works. What you want to do is when you order your team, go to date and then find out which players are playing on the 13th of February. You have to have them in your starting 11. That's non-negotiable. You have to have them in your starting 11. You don't want to bench players who play on the first day. And what I do is put those that play in the latter stages of the match day. So in this case, the 20th and the 21st of February, all of them are on my bench. So with Edison and Sommer, don't start Sommer over Edison. You start Edison. If he blanks or doesn't do that well and you're expecting more from Sommer, you then make the substitution during the substitution window, which will happen after the games have concluded for the original player you started. Then you will have these windows come up for you. If you check out the fixtures, UCL Fantasy shows you exactly when the substitution windows take place. The same goes for your outfield players. So as you can see, everyone who plays on the 13th and 14th are in the starting 11. I've also got Calhanoglu, but that's not a big deal anyway. And the way it works is those that score the least amount of points in your starting 11, you take them off for those on your bench, and sometimes you can wait for the lineups and then you can find out if your players are starting, those on your bench, and then bring them on if they are in the starting 11. So if you have any questions, be sure to let me know, and also check out my How to Play UCL Fantasy Guide. I make everything very clear there. I explain all the rules in detail, and the same goes for the captaincy. You can change those from your starting 11 and bring on your substitutes during the match day, but you can also change the captaincy, and you also look at the date. So those playing on the 13th, I've got plenty to choose from: Vinicius Jr., Bellingham, Haaland, and Phil Foden. And I'd personally go for Bellingham right now. Haaland would be my backup captain, so to speak. And if Bellingham doesn't perform that well, you can't then change to Haaland because he's already played. The way it works is you can change the captaincy to those that are yet to play. The same goes for your substitutions. And on Valentine's Day, the 14th of February, I would go for Harry Kane and change the captaincy during the substitution window, but only if Bellingham disappoints in the first place. If Harry Kane does the same and under-delivers and I want more from my captain, in the following week, I've got 3 options to choose from on the 20th of February on the Tuesday, and that's Calhanoglu, Sommer, and Hummels, and the most likely captain from those 3 would be Calhanoglu, who is on penalties for Inter Milan. And the final captain, if needed, and that's pretty much the last resort, last chance saloon, Saka would be my captain on the 21st of February. So hopefully that's all clear for all of you. You can see why I've ordered my bench in such a way and how the captaincy works and pretty much all the intricacies of UCL Fantasy. Thank you very much for watching this video. If you enjoyed it or found it useful, then be sure to smash the like button and subscribe for new. Let's try to get this video to the 200 likes and let's keep on pushing towards 23k subscribers and beyond. You can follow me on Twitter and Instagram, DylanRCM, and check all the links in the description below for the Patreon, Championships Discord server, and the UCL Fantasy League. All of that is there. I wish you all the best of luck for Matchday 7 and the rest of the season, and I'll see you next time.